right? And he says, but here's the spiritual blessing that we get from Christ. He chose us, that's God, for God, chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. Because there's some people who say, well, if God chose me to do this, then God took away my choice and I don't have free will. I know some people who believe that. I know some people are like, wait, that doesn't even make sense. But there are people who think, hey, if God, before the world was created, looked down and he chose me, right? Then they're saying, well, he forced me into it and I didn't have a choice. And that's not true. And Paul goes on and he explains this in a little bit because this isn't about our choice. He's not talking about anything that we did. He's talking about everything that God did, and he explains that God chose us, and he says he did it in love. So he says, in love, he predestined us to be adopted as his sons through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves. So this is a mouthful. And there are whole denominations that have formed on either side of this understanding of predestination. So I'm only going to spend a little bit of time on it because I really don't care about either of those denominations. I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm only talking about here's what the Bible says. So the word predestined, if you look it up in the Greek, it's a phrase that means to foreordain or decree beforehand, to appoint or determine before or in advance, which is why I had you circle that word before. It is all about doing something before something else happens. So there are people on both sides of this argument, and this is, again, no shame on them, but some of the people on one side of the argument says, oh, well, God didn't predestine us. And they say, when you look at this word, it's not what it means, which is not true. Because here's the thing, Paul uses a word, and not only uses it here, uses it in another verse, which I'll show you in a minute, and Peter uses the same terminology to communicate to people, whether we agree or not, he uses a word that communicated something specific to them. When they heard predestined, they thought, oh, so you're saying that he foreordained or he did this before or in advance. It would be the equivalent of, let me give you an example. If I said to everyone in the room, sorry for those watching online, if I said to everyone in the room, hey, after this, we're all going to go to my house and we're all going to have lunch. And everyone was like, cool. This is an example. Don't everyone go storming because you can't even all fit in my house. But this is just an example. But imagine if I said after this Sunday celebration, we're all going to go have lunch at my house. And everyone in the room said, cool. I'm in. So we all made the trek over to my house. I give everyone some apple cider. And then I break out some Monopoly games, some other board games. I break out old school Nintendo for those who want to play video games. And then Jackson and I sit in the back and we're doing VR stuff. And everyone's having fun. And then a couple of hours later, after we're playing games, I say, okay, everyone, time for you guys to go home because it's time for my afternoon nap. And you guys are like, wait. I thought we were going to have lunch. You told us you were going to give us lunch. And if I said to all of you, well, that's what lunch means to me, just playing games and drinking apple cider, how many people will think that's not what lunch means? Yeah, lunch means we're going to eat some food. So I have misled you and communicated something that wasn't true. So if Paul didn't mean to say that this was done in advance, then by using the word predestined, the Greek word, he has misled people, not just the people in Ephesus, but also the people in Rome, because he told them the same thing, which lends itself to he was being consistent about what he was communicating. He says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Here's how we know. For those God knew about in advance, he also predestined, same word, to be conformed to the image of his son. Peter uses very similar language to communicate the same thing. Because in 1 Peter, he says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. And when I was reading this, I was like, these sound like Starbucks drinks, but they're not, all right? But he says, to all of these places who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient to Jesus Christ. He makes the case, the same case that, hey, God chose us by his foreknowledge, and people get a little bit concerned. So like, what does that mean? Let me give you an example of God's perspective. Like you and I, we kind of are bound by time. God is not. So I know this is a microphone, just bear with me. Didn't have time to put up a big illustration. Imagine if this was the beginning of time, starts here, little green end of time is here. Everyone in the room, hopefully everyone watching online, we can see when time starts. We can see when time ends. We can see that because we're not inside bound by time. We can see all of the places in between the beginning and end of time. So because God could see all of the places from when time starts to when time ends, because he's not bound by it, he can see when Joe decides to commit his life to Christ. He can see when Floyd decides to commit his life to Christ. He can see when everybody in the room and every person in human history decides to commit their lives to Christ. Now, he can see that because he's not bound by time. So he can see it. In our case, it happens here, here, here. In his case, he just sees it all at once. And because he has knowledge of it before it happens, foreknowledge, then he said, for everyone that I see, even though it hasn't happened yet, that commits their lives to Christ, I am going to choose them and predestine them to be a part of my family. The reason that we were predestined is not because God took away our ability to choose. God predestined us because of the choice that we made.